14 new cards from Into the Inklands were revealed just last Friday alone. So I split this video into two, and here's part two. On Friday, Ravensburger released a trailer for Into the Inklands, and then a huge article from Screen Rant came out. Links to both are in the description below, so I suggest you check those out. There's a lot of cards from the Atlantis franchise and from Treasure Planet, so I hope you check those out. First up, though, is a card I forgot to talk about last week that was revealed on the Into the Inkwell podcast, which is 99 Puppies. 99 Puppies is a 5-cost uninkable action that says, whenever one of your characters quests this turn, gain 1 lore. So 99 Puppies to me is pretty expensive, and it's an uninkable finisher for aggro-based decks for Amber. Oftentimes, aggro decks will run out of steam around turn 5, and playing a card that allows you to simply keep questing when you know you're going to lose the characters anyway is a good use. Potentially just gaining 3 or 4 lore to close out a game before the controller mid-range decks can take the game away from you might be able to turn some losses into wins. I don't think you can ever really afford to run more than like 2 of this card, since most aggressive decks have a ton of uninkables, especially in the 1-drop slot. So the uninkable count is getting pretty high, but this is exactly the type of card you want as an uninkable. It's a narrow, powerful use that should win the game when played. Kita Atlantean is our first card that was revealed last Friday. She's basically just a vanilla, 1 cost, 2 strength, 2 willpower with 1 lore goon. But she is a princess, a hero storyborn. I want to point that out. Hopefully this just signals that we're going to have a Floodborn version of her in the set soon, and this will be the catalyst to kick that off. I do want to point out she is a princess and that she has very cool flavor text that's written in the Atlantean language that says, "Welcome to the Inklands," when you translate it. The Heart of Atlantis is a 4-cost uninkable item with the ability Life Giver, which says you may exert this, you may pay 2 less for the next character you play this turn. So Heart of Atlantis is a double lantern in all ways: cost, effect, and the uninkable nature. The question is, what type of payoff are you getting for this in the mid-game instead of as early as turn 2 if you play it then? You can immediately play a 2-drop off the heart, unlike a 1-drop from the lantern, which is nice. But assuming you want to play this on turn 4 and ink on turn 5, you're really ramping from 5 to 7 in the end. It sets up a really nice Stitch Carefree Surfer turn, especially when you play the 2-drop off of playing the Heart of Atlantis to begin with, if you have another character in play. But is this even necessary? Like, the issue I have is that any deck that will want to run this card is going to have to play it basically over 2 lanterns in deck building. And I'm not really sure that's worth it or even possible to do so if you absolutely want to get a lantern early in the game to take any of them out to play basically a double lantern in the mid game. I do think this is fringe if we continue to see Amber play with more of a go large strategy instead of a go wide strategy. So I can probably see maybe 2 of these making a list like that, subbing it out for 2 lanterns in certain situations. But I really don't think that this is going to have a massive impact on the metagame because it's just too expensive before it finally has a usage. Think of it like other ramp that usually comes into play on turns 2 through 4. This is just strictly worse than those because it can only be used to play characters, and it's too expensive and uninkable for its cost, in my opinion. Milo Thatch Spirited Scholar is our first Ruby card that was revealed on Friday. He's a 2-cost inkable, 2 strength, 2 willpower with the ability I'm Your Man. While this character is at a location, he gains 2 strength, and he has 1 lore. So there are payoffs for moving to locations that are pretty awesome, and those basically make you have, but they don't just make you have on-curve stats. I'm not really sure that this version of Milo does either of these things, honestly. He doesn't really get you above curve stats, and he doesn't really, there isn't really a huge benefit for getting him over to a location. This is the second card we've seen with similar payoff. The Minnie Mouse Funky Spelunker also had this similar payoff. So I look at these cards like delayed gratification. You basically are eventually paying the full cost. In this situation, you're basically paying essentially 3 to move to a 1-cost move location to get his full ability. But it's spread over multiple turns, which means you don't actually have to ever choose to move him there. But then you basically just have a 2/2 with 1 lore for 2, and that's really not good. Even when you have a 4 strength, 2 willpower, 1 lore, it's still not impactful enough, in my opinion, to pay over 2 turns. That's a little bit worse a little bit better than getting a 3/2/1 for 2, but not really, considering you still only have 2 willpower. That's easily taken out by total, like, so much of the removal that exists in the format. If he received like 2 willpower, then maybe we'd be talking, but now he's just too vulnerable. So I just think this card is very good in limited, but not very good in constructed. I would not expect to see it in constructed. Prince Eric Expert Helmsman is a 4-cost uninkable, 2 strength, 2 willpower, 2 lore. He's also a hero and a prince and Dreamborn, and he has the ability Surprise Maneuver. When this character is banished, you may banish chosen character. I'm going to go out on a limb and say beyond locations, Prince Eric Expert Helmsman is the most impactful reveal we've seen so far this season. I know it seems like a lot, but stick with me here. I've seen him downplayed and compared to cards like Cheshire Cat, Not All There, and Cusco, Temperamental Emperor. Both those cards, if you've been following me since the start of Lorcana, you know I am not a fan of those cards. So to compare it to that is extremely downplaying how good this card is. The key difference, though, is those 2 cards, Cheshire Cat and Cusco, they need to be banished in a challenge, which means it's extremely difficult for them to ever really be relevant above their cost. Like, Eric doesn't have these restrictions. Your opponent's one-sided removal, like Lady Tremaine or even Grab Your Sword, Prince Eric, when he gets banished, he actually gets to take down something with him. So it makes those cards for your opponent to be played on their turn a lot worse. I mean, sure, you can play him on the field and simply hope to quest for him until your opponent chooses to deal with him. No matter how they choose to deal with him, however, he's going to take down another character with him. Even if it's under a curve, you still gained advantage if you were able to quest with him and they challenge into him. But there are a ton of combos that you can run with Eric himself. The most important being, obviously, Teeth and Ambitions. I mean, yeah, that's simply going to be a, quote, 2 for 2 if Teeth and Ambitions actually was able to take out something with its 2 damage. But it's on your terms. So you're getting a virtual Dragonfire for 1 less, along with the Teeth payoff with really no downside. So even without that, I mean, you have a character that can quest for 2 as he's in play. Even without those combos, at worst, he's a Cusco, basically, which I already said I'm not a huge fan of, but at least at worst, he's a cheaper Cusco. Granted, he has 1 less lore, but he's also in a color that doesn't usually have those type of abilities to punish your opponent for dealing with your cards. So Eric, in my opinion, he gets the job done, and if there is additional Prince synergy, he's going to be just there. Just as a card on its own, I think the new Prince Eric is poised to take a spot in Ruby control decks, and I've heard in the Rise of the Floodborn, those decks are pretty good. Sumerian Talisman is a 3-cost inkable item with the ability Source of Magic. During your turn, whenever one of your characters is banished in a challenge, you may draw a card. So Sumerian Talisman, in my opinion, just requires too much work to make it work. If you're looking to benefit off it of challenging, I would just play Queen of Hearts Sensing Weakness instead. This is simply too expensive. It forces you to actually banish your own characters, not simply challenge with them, and has no real effect on the board for 3 cost. To me, this is another trap similar to the Sapphire item we saw in the last video. Even in a color with not that much card draw, this, in my opinion, just doesn't make the cut. What do you guys think of all the reveals that we've gotten over the past 2 videos? I know there's a ton. I think it's like more than 25. We're about a quarter of the way through the set. Please let me know what you think, how you think this is shaping up. What do you think about the inclusion of these franchises like Atlantis and Treasure Planet? Pretty rare, in my opinion. I mean, I'm a little bit older to see those types, but let me know what you think. What franchises do you think are still missing? What more do we have to see? We've seen DuckTales in addition to those as well. So let me know in the comments below what do you think is still missing. I know some of the newer movies like Kanto still aren't there, but I don't think this is the type of set where those are going to show up. This is definitely an exploration-based set with all those locations, so I'm not surprised that we have these exploration-based franchises showing up. Milo Thatch, Clever Cartographer, is a 1-cost, 2 strength, 2 willpower, 1 lore goon for Emerald. The only reason you'd ever play this card is basically to shift the Floodborn version that we're going to see of Milo Thatch in a second. So I would really only play it in that situation. He doesn't really have much else going for it, unless we somehow have Dreamborn and Hero Synergy, which currently we don't have. But here we have Milo Thatch, King of Atlantis, a 7-cost, uninkable, 4 strength, 4 willpower, 3 lore, shift 4, legendary, with the ability to take them by surprise. When this character is banished, return all opposing characters to their player's hand. So this is our 3rd legendary revealed from the Into the Inklands set. I wanted this card to be better, but in reality, I think it's just going to fall short. A 3 lore, 4 strength, 4 willpower, 3 lore for only shift 4 can gain you a lot of lore, especially when you shift him in. But his ability requires him to be banished, and at times that can actually help your opponent by sending all their characters back to their hand. The game right now is just centered around characters that have abilities of when you play this or have rush type abilities that there really isn't a giant board state that you're trying to like fight for control over, where returning all your opponent's characters to their hands will set them back all that much. And even if that was the case, your opponent has more say as to how that's going to happen than you do anyway. So unlike Prince Eric, where they have the ability to challenge into him and something else gets taken out, I don't see a scenario where you'd want to use this Milo ever as like sacrificial fodder to get his ability to go off. Maybe if we got some type of king synergy that allows him to be, standing there for his people or something like that and get banished for value, I can see it. But uninkable, 7 cost, I just don't see this card really seeing a lot of play. And Emerald's downside continues to be its uninkable nature, as we're going to see in a second as well. Lylliberious RoR, Cunning Mercenary. He's a 3 cost uninkable, 2 strength, 4 willpower, 1 lore with 2 abilities. The first one is, well, now you know. When you play this character, chosen opposing character gains Reckless during their next turn. And thanks for volunteering. Whenever one of your other characters is banished, each opponent loses 1 lore. Like, why is this card uninkable? Sure, you could argue that having these 2 abilities together in a 2/4 stat line is slightly above the curve, but that stat line leaves him banished to the most played 3-drop in the game, which is Madam Mim Fox. Even if somehow that wasn't the case, where he wasn't banished by Fox, like if he was a 3/4 or something like that, I still don't think this mid-cost uninkable would actually find room in your deck compared to the number of uninkables you actually want to run. He just isn't impactful enough. You need to do more to have his lore loss actually kick in. He doesn't work even when himself is like, it doesn't work when he's banished as well, which would actually help his case a little bit. I just think these abilities are just not impactful at all. There is enough challenging to matter. Anything you're going to want to challenge is just going to take him out, and I don't think he's going to get you any value for a 3 cost uninkable. I'm pretty disappointed once again that Emerald continues to get so many uninkables, and this one at a super rare is just not good enough. Friend Like Me is a 5 cost inkable song that says each player puts the top 3 cards of their deck into their inkwell face down and exerted. Friend Like Me is very powerful, very dangerous, and in my opinion, very skill intensive. Since your opponent can make use of the ink before you because they have to come into play exerted, you need to make sure you're using them against decks that are unlikely to take advantage of free ramping. Whereas your deck is obviously built to take advantage of the ramping. So the bottom line is, unless there are items or other onboard threats that require ink usage each turn, your opponent is probably not going to get great use out of their ink to begin with. I mean, yeah, sure, you're ramping them 3, but there's only so many cards in their deck that are actually going to be able to take advantage of them. Can they play multiple cards out in the same turn because you gave them 3 ink? Probably, but are they going to want to be so vulnerable to board sweepers at that point? It's not really going to do a whole lot with them. Also, if they're low on cards compared to you, you can make the same argument. I mean, you could sing this out as early as turn 2 if you shift the queen. I mean, I would never do that, but you could to take advantage of it early if you have a bunch of mid-game cards that you want to play. But I think you want to wait till a situation where you actually want to take advantage of it more versus your opponent. When you have more cards in hand, when you have the large ink cost cards in your hand compared to your opponent. I mean, you can also obviously want to be playing things like Be Prepared. So that way, as long as your opponent puts any threats down, a turn later, you're able to deal with them. But you're going to be dropping Haymaker after Haymaker, whereas they're just scrambling to use the extra ink effectively. I think this card is a powerful build around me card, and I think people are dismissing it simply because your opponent gets to use it first without a true understanding that, like, yeah, having your opponent have a bunch of free ink is good. It acts like, a bunch of cards they basically drew because they don't have to play a bunch of stuff as ink. But I don't think that their deck is going to be set up to take advantage of it as well as you are. So if you build your deck to maximize mirrored effects like this, that's always going to help you out in a card game compared to other things. The other thing is it's inkable, which means if you're playing against a deck that, you're not going to get an advantage, you just ink it. And yeah, you still have a bunch of haymakers in your deck, but you're probably not going to be playing Friend Like Me as your only accelerant. You're definitely obviously going to have Fishbone Cool in your deck because it's probably Sapphire's best card. So you're going to be able to ramp anyway. If you want to get benefit right away out of a card like this, you play Sapphire's other big staple, Bell, Strange but Special, which I can't imagine you're not already playing. because that way she gains 3 ink immediately, and you can gain a benefit of getting this 3 ink even if it is exerted right away. So I do think Friend Like Me is much better than people are giving it credit for. I think there's ways to build your deck to take advantage of it. And I think I think dismissing it is very dangerous for a powerful mirrored effect. Tinkerbell, very, very clever fairy. Say that 3 times fast. She's a 5 cost inkable, 3 strength, 4 willpower, uh, 2 lore with the ability I can use that. Whenever one of your items is banished, you may put that card into your inkwell face down and exerted. I really want to like this card, but I'm not sure she's actually needed. She's clearly a turn 5 play in preparation for questing with Hiram Flabbersham, Toymaker, to get you extra benefit from the item that he banishes. So you'll draw 2 cards, and that item will then go into your inkwell as an ink. But like, do you need that if you're drawing so many more cards and you probably have other accelerants already in play? Also, typically something in a Hiram deck that he's going to be banishing on turn 5 is a popsicle anyway, and you usually want to use Nick Wild to get that popsicle back to keep the engine going. I just think drawing cards off of banishing your items instead of actually putting them in your inkwell, because remember, like, Hiram might banish them, but a lot of times they come back. If Tinkerbell puts them in the inkwell for you, you're not going to get them back. So it really does become a decision. So I'm not really sure that a 3/4 with 2 lore for 5 makes the cut, adding an extra ability on top of it. I think she's just a bit too expensive and a bit too slow to actually make good use out of that ability. Audra Ramirez, the engineer. She's a 5 cost inkable, 2 strength, 5 willpower, 2 lore with ward, and the ability spare parts. Whenever this character quests, ready one of your items. The best use of Audra Ramirez, the engineer, is cards with things like Eye of the Fates, Sorcerer's Spellbook, and Sleepy's Flute. Things that gain you lore, and then you exert them to get that ability. The problem is that she actually needs the quest to use that ability. And while her word keyword actually helps keep her around, it will not actually protect her from certain board clears. Which means I think you're basically going to have a 1-turn window to use her ability before she's taken off the field regardless. I wouldn't write her off completely because she can be a powerful effect in an item-based combo deck. I just think she's probably too slow to make an impact because her ability is not a come into play effect. It's a when she quest effect. And I just think you're wasting too much of a turn to basically get a payoff for the item the next turn. I don't think this card is going to be good enough, but I'm willing to be wrong because I sometimes, obviously what do they say? The whole is greater than the sum of its parts when it comes to item deck. So we'll have to see. Lucky Dime is a 7-cost uninkable item, legendary, our first non-character legendary that we see in the game, with the ability number 1. You pay 2 ink, exert it, and choose a character of yours to gain lore equal to their lore stat. It's our Lucky Dime is Scrooge McDuck's first dime he ever made, and wow, it's a doozy. Is it expensive? Yes. Is it uninkable? Yes. But gaining lore outside of questing is very powerful. Just go look at Merlin Goat. You'll see how powerful it is in the metagame currently. Does this have a massive target on its back against steel opponents? Sure. But when locations are added to the game, you're not presenting threats on 3 levels for your opponent to deal with: characters, locations, and items. They just can't have all the answers all the time. And ramping to 9 ink, 7 to play this card, and 2 to use it right away, it's not really a tall task for Sapphire decks that are usually built around maximizing Fishbone Quill, Bell, and other answers that allow you to ramp at various times. So once this is in play, your characters basically have rush for questing because you can use the dime right away to gain their lore. It was confirmed by Steve Warner that this happens with current lore on the character, not printed lore. So bonuses from like Belle, Strange but Special, Tamatoa, So Shiny, or even Alice Growing Girl occur for the dime ability right away. Although I think if you already have Alice's ability in play, you're probably winning the game anyway. The other two, maybe not so much because they actually need to quest to gain their ability. There isn't a benefit to having other characters in play. I think this card is actually a perfect addition to those types of Bell lists, along with the card I talked about earlier, that Friend Like Me card. And while strategies currently around Bell have pretty much been around tier 2, tier 3 in the metagame, I think the rush type nature of Lucky Dime allowing for her 5 lore to hit your board right away may help push that deck to actually tier 1. And if you're playing a card like Fishbone Quill anyway, you can always quote ink this card through the Fishbone Quill ability and present additional items for your opponent to deal with. They can only have so much item removal in their deck, and if you present a threat like Fishbone Quill right away, sure, you don't want them to deal with it, but at least your Lucky Dime will be safe later. I mean, this is definitely a win condition. It's definitely going to have an effect on the metagame, in my opinion. It seems expensive until you really sit back and think, wait a minute, Sapphire always gets this much ink anyway. And this is a one-sided effect that can gain you a ton of lore without actually having to quest. And like I said, we've seen that be an extremely powerful ability. So I think writing this off as being too expensive and too easy to deal with is a pretty short-sighted. I don't think eventually paying 7 to get it out and 2 to use it, forcing your opponent to basically deal with it right away, or else basically every character you play from then on just gains lore right away. It's just too much to ignore, and I think Lucky Dime is going to find a place in the metagame for Into the Inklands. Our last card today is Helga Sinclair, Right-Handed Woman. She's a 3-cost inkable, 2 strength, 4 willpower, 1 lore with Challenger 2. So she basically becomes, when challenging, a 4/4. Unfortunately, most character challenging combat occurs on defensively, and because she only has 2 strength, which means Madam Mim Fox is going to eat her for dinner, lunch, breakfast, she's just going to get eaten by Madam Mim Fox. So I just think this card just isn't good enough. Unlike the other challenger cards like Captain Hook or Prince Eric, this one costs just too much and it's too vulnerable to those rush cards on curve as opposed to under curve. So you're not even literally losing any tempo by taking her out. I think this is a good card for limited, but probably just isn't good enough to see play and constructed, even though she does fit right in that challenger curve. So what'd you think of this week's reveals? If you like this type of content and you want me to keep going with all these types of reveals, go over every single card eventually that's going to be Into the Inklands, smash that like button so I know you're enjoying this type of content. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We do this every week. We'll cover every card from Into the Inklands. We cover all the metagame, etc. If you're looking to support us in other ways, we do have a TCG player store. I'll put a QR code link in the description below. It doesn't cost you any more money to buy any cards from us from that. It's the same exact prices as you would buy from TCG Marketplace, just saves us on fees. See you next week as we go into more Into the Inklands.